All right, welcome to this edition of Interview for the Line.info. I'm your host, Jacob Rueda. Speaking with me today is actor and director Joshua Bitton. Mr. Bitton is originally from Queens, New York. He's been active in entertainment for well over 20 years. He's appeared in numerous television productions, including NCIS Los Angeles, Castle, The Mentalist, and Grey's Anatomy, to name a few. He will be appearing in the upcoming series of Bupkis on Peacock, starring Scott Davidson. Mr. Bitton has also starred in films and film shorts as well. He runs an acting studio in LA, and he's one of the 160,000 actors who are currently on strike against the major film studios. Mr. Bitton, thank you for taking the time to speak with me today.
You got it.
We've got a lot to cover today. But before I do that, let's go back to the beginning before you became an actor. You got into acting because you watched the film Kramer versus Kramer with Dustin Hoffman and Meryl Streep. And for anyone who hasn't seen it, it's a pretty gripping drama about the law and divorce. How old were you when you first saw that film, and what about it made you curious about acting?
Okay, so um, I saw that film when I was a little kid, and there's a young boy in that film who's kind of amazing, like a remarkable performance for like a 4 or 5 year old. And I remember as a little kid thinking, "Oh, I could do that," but I didn't really. That isn't really like I thought about it. My father was an amateur photographer, and he'd won some award with a photograph of me, and so my parents started getting inquiries about me getting representation in New York, where I grew up. But they were both working, so I wound up not pursuing that until I was basically in college. And it was when I was in college, after doing some high school plays and things that were just kind of for fun, that I really kind of found the this as a career path. And I think the thing that drew me to it is probably the same thing that drew me to his performance in that movie, as well as Dustin Hoffman's and Meryl Streep's, which was there's a certain level of raw truth to it and raw connection between humans, undefensed, unguarded, that I found very appealing for sure.
So now, after all these years in acting, we get to the point where we're at today with actors in your union, which is the Screen Actors Guild. There's the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists and the Writers Guild of America, all on strike. I wanted to ask, what concerns did you have about going on strike in the beginning, and were you active in any group discussions within the union about a strike?
Yeah. So for me, I feel like we are professionally, not just in our industry, I think in most, at a real tipping point where we have to start choosing equality in terms of pay and also protections as more things become automated, more things become possible using computer, programs and AI and things like that. So for me, I think every actor, I think one of the big misconceptions is that all of us out here are a bunch of rich, overprivileged people. But there are some who have made a lot of money doing what we do, but most of us are blue collar union people, because our earnings can really vacillate. One year you could have a really great year, be a regular on a TV show, make $200,000, and then the next year you might make $30,000 as an actor. And so making sure that we are paid residuals for our work, since the studios and the streamers are continuing to make money off of what we have taped, filmed, recorded, we have to get some piece of that, or it becomes unsustainable for the majority of those people in the union. Um, I never want to go on strike simply because actors, in my experience, love to act. And when there's a strike, there's no opportunity to do so. But what was offered and what wasn't offered was quite egregious and put us at a lot of risk in terms of having the potential to earn in any kind of middle class way. So I was really buoyed by the fact that nearly 98% of the union in the vote voted to authorize a strike. And since I've been out on the lines most days, uh, I've been to 4 different locations, and it's lively. There's lots of people. The camaraderie is strong. I think the writers who've been at this for some time really welcomed us joining them because I think they need the boost. And it's I read a statistic. Someone did the math looking at the earnings of all the CEOs of Netflix, Universal, etc. And if you took 2% of their combined earnings, it would pay the WGA and SAG what we are all asking for. And that's just their salaries. So there is clearly a lot of money there, and we have to get a little piece of it, or we won't be able to sustain and bring entertainment to people, you know?
Did all the actors in the guild, or yeah, in the union, did they get to see what is it, AMPTP? Right. Did they you got to see all of that, what they offered, correct?
So we have since. So basically, they negotiated. SAG, in good faith, extended and gave them an extra 12 days. And in that 12 days, they did not come up in any way, no protections for AI. The salary increases were too small. There was no back end residual money. So, because we had voted for a strike authorization, that basically meant we empowered our board and our president to make that call. So they made that call before we saw it because there's a time element. Once they did, they sent us in an email a breakdown of what was asked for, what the response was from the PTP. So, for instance, one of the things this to me is the one that struck out the most. In our business, I could do a job. Let's say I was shooting something this week. There's a chance that I won't get a paycheck for a month, sometimes a month and a half, where I'm calling my agent, I'm calling my union, and the studio is saying, yeah, we're just running behind. Then when they finally pay you, they don't pay with any late fees. In the negotiation, they admitted we are often egregiously late. However, we will not pay late fees and we will continue to be late. And that was their negotiation. I worked on a job for Fox. I did a few episodes of a show, and when they rerun on network television, you're supposed to get residuals. In the midst of COVID, my residuals were 14 months late. And when they finally came in, they paid zero late fees, even though they probably owe me a couple $1,000s in late fees. That money is just gone. So it's problematic for sure.
Are late fees something that what's what I'm looking for, that are built into your contract?
Yes, late fees. We have fees if they're late in terms of our meals and things like that. So there are late fees that are built in. It's one of those things that very often becomes impossible to enforce because the studios, the streamers, they hold all the money. Sometimes you can go through the union, but the union is so, I think, flooded with requests like this that it can take quite some time. So a lot of times you get your paycheck and you're just happy to have it. Late fees aren't even really the biggest sticking point here. It just was an example of how they've been negotiating with us, but these things are built into contracts. They just very often don't pay them.
One of the things that I was going to ask about later, but I guess since we're addressing it now, is, and maybe we can elaborate a little bit more about this, is the misconceptions that a lot of people have. I mean, I'm just looking at social media, and there's a lot of, um, for want of a better way of saying it, a lack of empathy towards actors, because it's the idea is, without naming names, you're super famous, you can afford to go out to eat everywhere you want, you don't have to do, the things that, me and maybe other people have to do, actors don't have to do, because they make just oodles of money. I mean, what what do you say to that? I mean, how do you, I mean, what are some clarifications that maybe need to be made further with regards to this?
I mean, I could use myself as a pretty good example here. I'm not famous, right? I've worked on some great projects and I've done a lot of guest stars on TV. So I'm sort of one of the lucky few in the sense that the majority of my earnings come from acting. Last year, uh, I did 4 episodes of television. Between those 4 episodes, I made $31,000 as my salary. Okay. Now, 4 episodes, booking 4 jobs is quite a lot for us. So, but I made $31,000, and then because of residuals, because of the past work I've done, I probably made about another $22,000. So last year I made $53,000 as an actor living in Los Angeles, where the cost of living is one of the highest in the country. And I'm one of the lucky few because of our membership. I'm trying to remember what the right statistic is, but I think at any given moment, 86% of our membership does not earn enough money to qualify for health insurance. And just so it's clear, you need to earn $26,000 a year to qualify for health insurance, which means only 14% of that membership, which is about what we're saying, about 21,000 of the 160,000 qualify for health insurance. Let alone, simply qualifying for health insurance is not enough money to survive in Los Angeles or New York. I would say even Vancouver or Toronto, where a lot of the work is done. So for the most part, we're not wealthy. For the most part, actors have second jobs. I teach acting classes and run my own small school. And I do that because, like I said, there have been a couple instances in my 20-year career where I've made what to me seems like a good amount of money. For the most part, I've been, like a gig employee. I go in, I do a guest star, I go in, I do a guest star. And I could survive that way years ago because of residuals. And when they would rerun it on network television, I would make a little bit more money. But now that they stream, the streaming residuals are almost none. So I did an episode of Daredevil, which is a hugely popular show. In the episode, I got into a fight with the Punisher, who is maybe the most popular character in Marvel TV. Netflix would not release numbers, so I cannot tell you how many millions of times that show was downloaded. But in the course of 6 years since I shot it, I've made a combined total of $1,900 in residuals. And Netflix has probably made, I don't even know what the math is, but it's high. So I started to notice for myself, oh, I need to teach more, because unless I get a big film or a regular character on a TV series, a series regular role, I can't sustain my life without having a second job. And I think most actors live in that zone. Is they live in a zone where they teach, they have a side business. I know a number of actors who are also therapists, and they went back to school because they realized they need to earn money. Everyone hopes for the glamour and everyone hopes for the big paychecks, but for the most part, most of us are just sort of surviving. And with what has been offered to us, survival for most of us seems impossible if those are the rates of how to go about it.
I also want to highlight, if it's possible, just the skill of acting itself, where you have to, I would assume, and forgive me if I'm incorrect, but there's a certain level of skill that you're expected to have for a certain role, or maybe just in the industry in general. It's not easy, to do that. Coupled by the fact that not only do you have to have a certain amount of skill, you also have to do it at this level, and you have to do it repetitively and consistently, on top of having to meet the expectation of studio execs, directors, other actors. And am I right in this? I mean, you know
Oh yeah, yeah. You're incredibly right on point. I mean, I went to uh, a graduate program for 3 years in a conservatory, which I'm going to be really honest, I'm still paying back the student loans from. So I trained with a man named William Esper, who many, while he was alive, considered the best acting teacher in America, if not the world, but one of, right, an elite group. Of my class of 16 actors, I can say now, about 20 years out of school, there's 3 or 4 of us who are still acting. So one, just statistically, 75% don't make it past 5 years. because of the demands of the industry. Then look, you definitely get your naturals and your people who hit it big because they're beautiful and they fit into the right zone. But for the most part, the actors you're looking at on screen have been seriously trained, have continued to take classes, train physically, train dialects. I have to be able to do 20 dialects off the top of my head because I don't know what the role is going to require. Um, you know, and on top of the fact that we love to do it. No one I know who continues in this doesn't do it without loving it. And with that love, that means sometimes you do things like I did a play earlier in the year. Amazing experience. I got paid $600 a week to do that play. So I had to teach 3 classes a week alongside doing a play 6 nights a week to survive. And so there is a tremendous level of sacrifice. And yes, when we work, it's a dream. I don't know many actors who are truly unhappy at work because when we get to do it, we love it so much. But the commitment, the there's an old adage, book a trip, book a job. So if it's your wedding and I'm coming to go to my brother's wedding, I missed my brother's wedding because I had a job. And the jobs are so far and few between. Unless you're famous and can actually pick and choose, you're taking that job because you don't know where the next one is coming. So there is a lot. There's a lot that happens where you get a job and then you shoot a pilot and then an executive decides that you remind them of an uncle they don't like, so they fire you and they hire another actor. I've heard all kinds of stories. So what we're up against is so difficult and imposing that when we can't get a contract that seems fair, it starts to feel like an existential crisis. Like, how do I do this thing that I love, that I've trained so hard, that I work so hard, that I love so much? And when we do it, we get to, we really get to bare our souls. How do I continue to do that if you guys don't show us respect in making sure that those of us who aren't famous and aren't millionaires can do this and support those famous people in their roles, can support that studio by making sure that the project is fully well rounded, because great acting looks easy, but it's not. It's a really, really, really difficult skill for sure.
I want to talk a little bit about economics for just a moment here, because we just got word that the Federal Reserve just raised interest rate. Just raised the interest rate today. It's now at what, 5.25 to 5.5%. So I think that's, and inflation is currently at 3%. At least that was a report from last month.
That's come down, which is good.
Right, exactly. It's been down considerably from what it was a year ago. It's down, but again, from the reports that I've read, consumers are still a little bit, iffy. They're not sure. They're not sure what's going on. I wanted to ask you, given that you run a small business, okay, on top of, your acting, how are you able to work all these things within this fluctuating economy?
I mean, it's really tricky. I think any small business owner would say so. I try to be understanding with my students. So I definitely have more students on a payment plan than paying me upfront on a monthly basis. Um, if I can and it comes up, I will give someone relief or a break for a month because they can't afford it, because I know they really want to have that, their butt in that seat, so to speak. It's also tricky because I teach acting classes and now we're in a strike. So I have some students who are very much like, oh, this is the time for me to train. This is the time for me to study because I don't have to worry about whether I'm going to get a job or whatever. But what I'm getting a lot of too is people who say, look, I make my money, even commercials, which are not on strike, there are now less of them because coming out in the fall at this rate, there won't be new episodes of TV shows. Everything's on hold. I was in the middle of shooting something when we got stopped halfway through shooting the series with the writer's strike. And so there's going to be this gap. And so Actors, I think, in general, are hustlers. You kind of have to be if you want to survive. And in the end, that's really what it comes down to. Is I find ways to hustle, and I've learned to be smart with my money, so that when I make a decent amount of money on something, I squirrel it away. I'm not like a frivolous spender, you know. Um, so I think the economics are scary, and I think that for a lot of us, it started, like I said earlier, it's starting to feel like this existential kind of battle, because I had read recently, that we're not getting great coverage in the media, in news, and that's not surprising because they're owned by the studios and the streamers. So they're spinning to the public, you know, you got a bunch of rich elitist people. When I'm a blue collar kid who grew up in Queens, whose father owned a clothing store and whose mom was a school teacher, and I mean like a clothing store like this big, we scraped by and we hustled by. I had a really, on my first day on the line, or the second day on the line, I marched with Adam Schiff, one of our representatives here, and we chatted for a little bit, and a really lovely guy. And I said, I really appreciate you being out here. And he said, well, a lot of my colleagues in Washington think that you're all a bunch of rich, spoiled people. And I know that most of you are blue collar union people across the board. And I wanted to lend my voice to that. And that meant a lot to me, because I do think that that's a real big deal. There's a real misconception what we earn. And most of us are just getting by.
One of the things that I forgot to mention that I wanted to mention was also the cost of promoting yourself, because from my understanding, there's headshots, you have to pay agents, or rather, like an agent's salary comes from part of what you earn. I mean, I hope I'm getting all of this right. I'm not sure. Again, and this is all on top of what your daily expenses are. Food, rent, mortgage, or whatever. I mean, how is it possible to drive that home to critics and let them know that this is something that is real, it's substantial?
I mean, I would go with the simple fact that every actor is, in essence, their own small business. So your agent gets 10% of what you earn. Your manager gets 10% of what you earn. If you have a lawyer, your lawyer gets 5% of what you earn. But so for the most part, people are giving out 10 to 25% of what their earnings are to their team that represents them. And that's always the way it goes. And and on top of that, you have taxes, etc. So typically when you work a job, if you do a guest star on a TV show, you might make anywhere from $7,000 to $10,000, which is a good amount of money for a week, except you may not get another job for weeks or a month or a couple months, and you typically will see just a little bit more than half when you get your check. So there's that element of it. Then the other economic factor is our appearance, going to the gym, things like that, is actually part of our job. And maintaining that in whatever way that you do, it is an expense. You have to, I mean, there are people who pay money to audition and read in front of casting directors they haven't gotten a chance to meet with. So there can be a bit of a pay to play kind of element. Like you said, headshots. If you're on a TV show, but you're not the star, but it's a good role, you you might want to really jump on the PR version of that. So if you hire a PR person, that's typically $3,000 a month. So I did that once on a TV show I was on because I was a regular, but I wasn't high enough or famous enough for the network or the studio to want to pay for that. So I had to pay. I paid $9,000 for 3 months of PR. They got me a lot of interviews. They're really professional. They're really wonderful, and they said to me, "Look, we've milked this for what it's worth." So so there's all you carry so many of the expenses of what you do, that what you earn, you this much of it is what you're using for your life.
So, in a conversation with Senator Bernie Sanders, your union president, Fran Drescher, said that the strike was a quote, workers against big business and oppression issue. Now, you've been in the entertainment industry for, like I said, well over 20 years. How um, how have you seen studios evolve to what Miss Drescher described?
Well, there's a there's a personal when I first started working the business, your relationship with your producers and oftentimes executives from networks felt quite personal, and uh, it feels much less so at this point. There's very much a sort of bottom line. You're talking about now publicly held companies that are trying to appeal to to stockholders and not to the quality of what they put out. So we definitely feel it that way. You feel it in the way things get negotiated. Like I said, I've done, I don't know, something like 40 or 50 television guest stars, and which is lucky in terms of being able to get that much work. But it used to be, because I had done a certain amount and I'd done a couple HBO miniseries, when I got offered those, the rate that I was offered was always kind of one that was very much like, we really respect your client's work, so we're coming with, this rate that is a good rate. And now what I get a lot of is, listen, we're really, we'd love for him to take the part, but we're offering this and that's it. And if they don't take it, if they don't work, because I grew up in New York, sometimes I will work as a New York hire, which means I don't get paid per diem. I don't get put up. I have to supply my own accommodations. I have to fly myself. They will say, take it or leave it. And that has become far more common where, I know I'm not famous. I know that, that I work and whatnot. But there's a level of respect that has disappeared because they it feels like they don't care. It feels like bottom line money is more important than project, is more important than integrity, and I think actors in general are create families when we work, whether it's a play or a film or a TV show. We sort of come together as a unit, and that can be a really bonding experience, and it's really wonderful. But it feels very removed from our bosses now. They seem to be people over there, and there's a cutthroatness that's different. The business has always been cutthroat in some regards, but it's different now. It just feels very brass tacks money. Can we make money off of you? Can we not? Can we cut you out financially and make this work? Yes, let's do that. And so there's a coldness to it that I saw in Fran's response. I think Fran is, an actress who's brilliantly talented and funny and has worked with all of these people before. And you could see the optimism that she was like, oh, I know these people. I know Bob Iger. I know all these people. I'm going to go in and chat with them. And she came out, I think, shocked and hurt that they really did not value us as humans. And that was tough to see, for sure.
It sounds to me that based on this description that actors are more treated like commodities rather than human beings. Would you assert that as correct?
Well, yeah, especially after their offer about AI, where they, I think people know about this now, that they offer to pay extras a half day salary, scan their image, own it in perpetuity, where they could use it as background in any project or video game that they wanted, and never pay that person a dollar, like literally turning them into a commodity that is paid for you're talking about 250 bucks. And and what's interesting about that is some of those extras will start as extras and go on to big careers. So now they own the equivalent, let's say, of a Timothy Chalamet or a Viola Davis. They own her image from when she was scraping a living, and they go, well, let's pop her into this project. So if you can offer that and say that it's a groundbreaking offer, then you're looking us in the face and saying, I don't think of you as a person. I think of you as a meat puppet. And I can take your meat puppet and put strings on it and let a computer play around with it and put it in any project. And what we do when we do it well is we move you, we make you laugh, we tell you stories that transport you because we're giving of ourselves authentically. That's hopefully touching something authentic in you that you enjoy. That's a human thing, That's not a computer thing, in my opinion.
I want to talk a little about UPS. You've heard the news. UPS just averted a strike that would have crippled the economy had they actually gone on it. They, for viewers who don't know, they've settled on a tentative 5-year plan. It's with everything that's been going on lately, is sort of like a kind of a light at the end of the tunnel kind of a situation, at least for them. What do you think? But we've been seeing a lot of companies unionize. Like we got Starbucks, there was Amazon. That was kind of a big one. Let's see, and all of these strikes that's happening. What do you see that these events? What do you think that signals to leaders, like politicians, to business leaders, and the public? What do you think that signals to them?
I think workers are tired. I think that the pandemic did something, which was a lot of people, we all had to pause, we all had to stop, and everyone was scared and frustrated and lonely and dealing with it and all the things and dealing with death and sickness and whatnot. And I think that we all looked and went, I'm tired of surviving literally paycheck to paycheck. That when I get towards the end of the month, I don't know if I'm making rent, or I don't know if I can uh, come to your 40th birthday party because I have to get an Airbnb for the night and I don't have an extra $200 to drop on something frivolous. So I think that people got tired of it, and we're in the midst of the pandemic. We're watching all of these massive companies have record breaking profits, and hearing about CEOs making 29 million, 69 million, 124 million dollars a year, and bonuses and this and that. And the disparity has just grown and grown and grown and grown and grown. And I think people are tired of it. I think, my mom was a union worker. She was a school teacher in New York City. So I've watched this fight my whole life. And, sometime in the 80s, early 80s, Ronald Reagan, when he was the president, broke the air traffic controllers union. He just disbanded them when they wouldn't show up to work, saying it was a national security issue. And I don't know all the legalities of how he was able to do that, but I believe that's kind of what encapsulated his ability to do it. And it began the slow disintegration of union strength in this country. And then I think there has been, by certain outlets in the media, an attack on unionization, calling it greedy, lazy, this and that. But to me, from what I've witnessed in this country and seen with my mom, I've worked in Pittsburgh, which is a big union town, steel workers and boilermakers. The middle class in this country was built by union rules, that you could work a labor job and make a decent living, where you could buy a small house, you could have health coverage for your family, and get a couple weeks of vacation and live a nice life. And I think people want at least that. And I think we're watching Jeff Bezos get in a rocket and go to space while people are pulling 16-hour shifts at Amazon because they have to. And I think we're tired, and I think we're at this tipping point where the working class in this country, and it looks like around the world, is going, we're tired of this. And the really wealthy class is going, we kind of like it the way it is. And we're clashing. And the UPS deal, what I read, if my math is right, at $2.75 an hour raise in the first year for a full-time worker, that's like $5,000 a year in a 40-hour a week, 50-week a year job. That's significant. That changes, that gives people cushion. The fact that and so their money's there. The money's there. It's just those with it don't want to spread it out. And I really don't understand it, because if I had $1 billion, I couldn't spend it all, but I could fix a lot of problems by lending my money and giving my money to places that can build schools, build roads, housing, healthcare, whatever it is. There's so much money out there, and I think people are seeing it and they're freaking tired. You know, that's my take.
Given the situation as it stands today, how do you see the future of entertainment?
That's a really interesting and tricky question. Actors, in my opinion, writers, directors, creatives in general, I always say we live off of hope. Every time I have an audition, there's a chance I may get a job. And that is the kind of sustaining force of what I have done. And when I'm lucky to get that job, I am joyous as a little kid with a new set of Lego. Like, it's just the best, right? So I want to be hopeful. I want to be hopeful that we can reach a fair deal, you know, that we can, which will help us sustain. I am tired of constantly feeling the pressure of, am I going to make a living? Am I going to make a living? And so I think we're going to be at this strike for a few months. I think the actors were used to this, being without work. So my hope is, to stay hopeful, is that their bottom line, it's going to take a little while for their bottom line to be affected. But as I was speaking to my friend's father-in-law the other day, who's not in the industry, he said, so come September, like, my favorite shows, there's going to be no new episodes of CSI, and there's going to be no new episodes of Fire Country. And I said, no. And he said, well, I'm going to stop paying then. And so maybe when it starts to hit their bottom line, or they see that we can't be broken so easily, they can come back and give us a fair deal in the way that the Teamsters were able to negotiate with UPS. I'd be thrilled to get back to work, shake an executive's hand and say, hey, I'm really glad to do this with you. Because in the end, isn't that what we all want? We want to work, we want to create, we want to sustain our families and sustain our lives, and rather than feel like we're constantly like at each other. So I'm I'm choosing faith over fear is what I've been saying lately.
Is there anything else that you want to share or talk about that we haven't covered in this discussion that maybe people need to know?
I just want to, I guess what the last thing I would say, it kind of goes to sort of the initial thing you were talking about is, I've been on the lines and I've seen a lot of friends and a lot of faces who I think people listening to this, people watching the news and hearing things would recognize. And that for the most part, the majority of those very recognizable people are very often in financial turmoil because of the inconsistencies of our business. And that's the real reality of what it is to be, an actor and writer in this time.